Hello, True Health Seeker, and welcome to another exciting adventure of the Learn True Health podcast. Today, we have with us a wonderful interview. I love this guest, and she's come back for a second time to share with us. But first, I want to thank our latest Patreon supporter. Thank you so much, Jennifer Roque, for becoming a Patreon supporter of the Learn True Health podcast. For those who don't know what Patreon is, it's a really cool way of sort of crowdfunding where you can choose something you really believe in. It could be a podcast, it could be an artist of some kind, a videographer, someone who makes documentaries. There's all sorts of different content creators, whether it's physical content or media content like I do with the podcast, and you can support them. So the listeners, the followers, the consumers of the media, of the things that they enjoy from their artist or from the creator, they can together as a group, as a cohort, as a community, they can support the work that is created. Now, I've shared this before on the podcast. It costs about $188 per episode to produce. We have, between all of the equipment and all of the bandwidth that we have to pay for, we have a full-time assistant and a part-time writer. And just all those expenses add up. And I love doing the podcast. I love helping you helping you to find your true health and helping your friends and family, because a lot of listeners, I've gotten the feedback that they share this with their mom and their sister and everyone in their life, and it helps them to find those answers they're looking for. And that's exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. So if you love the Learn True Health podcast, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can support us at $1 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month, $25 a month. And there's a bunch of perks that I give just for our Patreon supporters, just for our community. So if you'd love to support the Learn True Health podcast, that would be awesome. And you also get, let's see here, you have episodes that are commercial free that you actually receive first. So you'll have first dibs to listen to all of the episodes that as I produce them. I will call out your name and say you're awesome, just like Jennifer Roque is awesome for being our latest Patreon supporter. And all of the video content that we create, our course content that we create, you have access to. And then we have a book club that we are forming. It's the Learn True Health Book Club at $25 a month. I send you a book, and I'm looking to get the author to create a intimate Q&A with our book club after we have gone through their book together as a group. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, then definitely go to learntruehealth.com, and in the menu at the top you'll see where you can just says right at the top in the menu, join our Patreon community, or you can go to patreon.com and search Learn True Health. Of course, that link is also going to be in the show notes of today's podcast, so you can easily find it there as well. Now, I do have a specific level for those who wish to get a message out. So if you have a business that you think the listeners would like to learn about, then we have a Patreon level that you can join, and I will give your business a shout out, or your message. If you have a message that you want the listeners to hear, then at that Patreon level, I will read your message to them. And so definitely check it out. Know that all of your money is going towards producing this podcast and bringing you all this awesome information. And I love all of you guys for contributing back to the podcast. It really makes a big difference for me in getting this content out there for you, and finding those awesome guests to interview. We have had an amazing year so far. 2018's been pretty awesome. If you've been listening to the last few episodes, it's been awesome. Dr. Mark Hyman, Dr. Esselstyn, just the list goes on. And I have some really heavy hitters coming up in the coming months. One of those heavy hitters is Dr. Joel Fuhrman. I am such a huge fan of his. So we've got some amazing guests that we have interviewed in the last few months, and some amazing guests that are coming up. Really excited to bring you those interviews. Thank you so much for being a listener, and thank you so much for sharing this podcast with those you love. If a friend shared this podcast with you, then you know that they really do care about you and want to give you the best information possible so that you can put all those puzzle pieces together that'll help you achieve your true health. Awesome. Well, enjoy today's interview and have a fantastic rest of your day. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 238. Well, this is a topic that is recently near and dear to my heart. Very excited to have Sharon Palmer back on the show. This is going to be Sharon's second time coming on the show, and I can't wait to just have her become a regular guest. It was so much fun having you here before, and so welcome back.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be back myself too.
Absolutely. Now, when you came on the show last year, I was not yet 100% on being plant-based. In fact, at the time I was eating more paleo ketogenic. I had spent like a year doing more of a ketogenic diet. Not like Atkins where it's only meat only, but it was
Mhm.
close. There was a lot of vegetables, but there was still a lot of meat. And you really opened my eyes to the benefits of being plant-based, or at least more plant-based. And I think it took a few more guests to convince me, but I kept telling my husband all these things I was learning. As all these guests came through to tell us the different angles of why eating plant-based is good. And finally, on January 1st, my husband said, "That's it." I'm like, "I am so done with meat." And I was like, "Great, let's try it. Let's try to go plant-based." And here it is, March. And so we are like 2.5 months into being plant-based. I haven't been 100%, but I have had chicken a few times. I do have some eggs occasionally. My husband's been 100%. And about 3 days in, he goes, "This food is so delicious. If you had told me the food was this good, I would have done this years ago. I'm not even missing meat. I feel so amazing." And we do. Both of us feel really, really amazing. And I just can't believe, like, after being plant-based for a few months, I can't believe how much meat we ate. And I don't miss it. It's amazing because I really thought that I would miss it because when I tried to go vegetarian a few times, in my teens and in my 20s, I became a junketarian. I ate Subway sandwiches as long as there's no meat on them. I ate pizzas as long as there was no meat on them. And I felt like crap. Well, of course I felt like crap. I was eating crap food, just happened to have no meat. So now I'm focusing more on the diet that you promote, which is this wonderful whole foods way of eating that's sustainable, that's really healing for the body, that's really nutritious, and I don't feel that I'm going without. And the one thing at first that happened is I was hungry all the time, but what I learned is that often people just don't eat enough. When they go plant-based, you can really like just eat tons and tons and tons of food because it's so low calorie and so dense in nutrition. So this is such a fun way to eat. And I love that you promote this because not only are you promoting health for the body, you're promoting health for the planet, and that there's a direct correlation between the two. I'm really excited for us to talk about this today.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested to hear about your own experience, and it sounds like you're doing really well. And it is a really delicious, healthful way to eat. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. They think they're going to be missing out on something. But when you're really focusing on these whole plant foods, they're so satisfying and delicious, and your body is flooded with these nutrients that, benefit us in so many ways. I think it's interesting you said that you were hungry at the beginning, and a lot of people do experience that. And you're absolutely right because this way of eating is so, dense in nutrients, but low in energy or calories, low in fat naturally. So, people have a tendency to not like eat as much as they really could. You can pile your plate with plants. So, but it takes a little tweaking, and then you find kind of a pattern that really makes you feel satisfied and really complements your health.
And listeners can check out the first episode you did with us, which is episode 197. And we really dived into the plant-based diet and all of its benefits. What I want to remind people is that Because we think automatically, well, where am I going to get my protein from, right? And when I heard, like, this is really the tipping point for me, when I heard that I could get 18 grams of protein from 1 cup of legumes, that was enough to finally convince me that it was easy to do, because I love legumes. They're so delicious. There's over 100 varieties of legumes and beans, and we really can get all of our protein from vegetables. In fact, this is something that had me kind of it just twisted my brain and let it crack open, so that I could finally understand that it's possible to be totally healthy, eating plant based. Look at cows. Look at how muscular bulls are, and see how much muscle they built. Well, where do they get their protein from? They get their protein from vegetables, and so why are we getting our protein from the animal when we could just skip the middleman and go straight to where they get their protein from?
That's exactly, you said right. You said that really well. And another comparison is primates, are basically vegan. And we're very genetically similar to primates. So that's another example in nature how they can eat vegetables all day long and get enough protein. And in fact, they've done some interesting research on if you if you fed humans the diet of primates, all of our health parameters change dramatically within a couple of weeks, like cholesterol drops, glucose drops, all these things, blood pressure, because of this plant-based diet.
I just interviewed a guy who, he's a type 1 diabetic, and he takes less than 30, I believe it was 30 units of insulin a day, because he's really increased his insulin sensitivity, which everyone wants, no matter whether you have diabetes or you don't have diabetes. We want to be insulin sensitive. The more insulin sensitive we are, the more efficient our body is working with glucose and with insulin, and that's really, really a good thing. And he and a lot of diabetics, especially type 2, all type 2 diabetes is massive insulin resistance, meaning they have lost their sensitivity to insulin, and so the body has to produce more and more and more and more insulin to get the same result. And that then sustains higher blood sugar spikes over a longer period of time because insulin isn't working, and that causes so much damage. It increases cancer, it increases like peripheral neuropathy, and losing your eyesight, and inflammation systemically through the body, and just it really does cause other heart disease. All those things can be contributed from uh too much high blood sugar, which is then related to the insulin resistance. And what they're finding is they could take people, and this blew my mind. I did not believe it at first. It was sounded too crazy. But if you take people like type 2 diabetics, for example, even type 1 diabetics, and you put them on the same diet that an ape eats. So give them a ton of bananas and a ton of whatever that they would eat in the jungle, lots of vegetables and tons of fruit. Um, and you'd think, "Oh my gosh, that's so much sugar, that's all that fruit." But if you get them on that diet, after a month, their type 1 diabetics require less insulin, and the type 2 diabetics notice that they're really balancing, their blood sugar's balancing, their energy's back, and eventually stop being type 2 diabetics. They no longer have diabetes. And that blew my mind, that this naturally low fat, it's not that we're looking to take fat out. Like, I hate that the thinking like a low fat muffin has somehow been adulterated. I mean, like, bananas naturally doesn't have a lot of fat because it's not like a pork chop. But
Hmm.
we eat these whole foods, and that leads to insulin sensitivity. And so there's something about consuming highly processed foods and processed fats that have led to causing insulin resistance. So this is really, really fascinating, that there's this whole group of people that through this lifestyle, through this plant-based lifestyle, have been reversing their heart disease and their diabetes.
Yeah, it is very fascinating, and it's this research is accumulating. We're seeing more studies specifically on plant-based diets and diabetes, reversal of type 2 diabetes with a plant-based diet, to the point that even like the American Diabetes Association is looking at this and saying that this could be, a helpful treatment plan for people once they've they've had type 2 diabetes, because a lot of nutrition research is really looking at prevention But what do we do with people once they have the conditions? And if we can actually reverse things, that's very powerful.
Yeah, but we are going up against a system that doesn't want to reverse disease. They want to put them on drugs and make money off of them. So we we have to remember that we got to think outside the box, because the box, we don't want to be a statistic. If you're a statistic, you're going to be on drugs. 70% of adult Americans are on at least one prescription medication. If we start going with all the what all the associations say, and what they want us to do, then we're going to end up holding on to the disease, right? And so we really need to look at what's working and go with what's working. And this is what's working. And this is totally disrupting the system. Think about how much the agriculture will fight to keep us eating meat. There's been so many cases where their marketing dollars will convince people that we need to eat meat. And we need to consume dairy. And this dairy and meat are so subsidized by the government that if they weren't subsidized, it would be unaffordable to consume them at every meal. And so it's a system that is broken, and it's a system that is unsustainable. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So you're right now, you're getting, is it your master's in sustainable food systems?
That's correct. I'm studying at Green Mountain College in Vermont, and I'm over halfway through. It's very exciting because I'm really passionate about how we eat, and how it can make an impact on the environment, and how this is connected to human health as well.
Now, I think a lot of people think, oh, that's a nice idea, like recycling and compost. That's a nice idea, but I'm only going to do it if it's convenient for me. If I have to go out of my way to do it and it doesn't really benefit me, it just benefits like my grandchildren, I'm probably not going to do it all the time. And so, I think a lot of people don't see that there's an actual benefit to them doing this, to adapting to a more plant-based diet right now, that there's a health benefit to them right now, but also that there's a massive positive impact that they can have on their environment right now. So this idea of global warming, I think some people are like, well, okay, that's like a global warming like 100 years from now, so I don't really need to do it because it's really not going to benefit me. But when they see that it's actually helping them right now, the more, like, let's say all the listeners decided to eat less meat and to consume more local, organic, plant-based foods. By doing that, we're actually impacting our health as a direct result. Can we talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and I love it when things are in alignment. What's good for our health is also good for the planet. So, a lot of the things we're talking about that are sustainable efforts that we can make in our own diet, to protect the environment, are also good for our own health. So, I love that connection. And, one of the most powerful things you can do to reduce your carbon footprint is to eat a plant based diet. So, here we are back about talking about that plant based diet. And really, the reason why is in our modern agricultural system, we we put animals and livestock on large concentrated farming operations, and we grow plants to feed those animals. So we have to grow all of these plants, and it takes all the water and energy to produce those plants, and then we feed them to animals and eventually harvest those animals for food. But if we just ate the plants directly from the soil, we could cut out a lot of the middleman, and that is why it's such a drastically reduced carbon footprint, for eating the plants versus the animal foods.
Mm-hmm. Did you like the documentary, What the Health?
I did see that documentary. I liked some of the points. I thought some of the points weren't as concrete, in terms of science, as I would have wished them
Mm-hmm.
to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always concerned that the plant-based movement should stick to the science and not overpromise things. But I did like the film. I thought it was interesting, and he also did the film Cowspiracy, which I liked that film better,
Oh,
personally.
okay. I haven't,
Hmm.
so I like that you said that, because I have been resistant to cowspiracy, because I'm like one of those people that's like, I really want to learn all this, but I'm also don't want to be like in total fear mode the entire time. So I like documentaries that are less about fear mongering and more about showing us that there's a better way. And I like that you said that about What the Health, because I got that's the exact same response. I felt like some of it was not concrete, and that can actually be detrimental to his overall message. And that's really what turned me off the movie at first, but I gave it a second chance. And then what I really liked was how he showed, and many documentaries do this, where they go to the farms and they actually show us the impact. Like, there's entire cities that are near, pig farms, for example, and the entire city has asthma, and the rate of cancer is astronomical. And it's like, but they purposefully have these areas. They have these pig farms in poorer areas where these people don't have a voice, or that the real estate around them, it just becomes so cheap because no who wants to live near a pig farm. But this is what's happening to all of us. I mean, the amount of waste, um the air pollution, the pollution to the soil, the pollution to our water, from the massive farming, is really detrimental.
Absolutely, and I agree that film did showcase that, and this is really true. That film got that aspect right on the nose, and we see this in modern animal agriculture. CAFOs is a term, concentrated animal feeding operations. These are large agricultural operations with 1,000 or more animals, and the problem is that they're concentrating all the manure. That's one of the major problems. In addition to the horrific animal welfare conditions that animals are exposed to, but from an environmental standpoint, they concentrate all the manures on this land, and there's nothing to be done with it. It's just too much for the amount of land, and they accumulate in lagoons or storage tanks, and it's a real problem because in the history of agriculture, animals were on a mixed farm, which was, if you go to developing nations, they're still doing it this way, but where the manure from the animals could be used in the crops, and it was this balance in nature. But now we've removed animals from the farm, so the manure, which could be nutrients for the soil, is not being used that way. And then
Hmm.
it's running off, it's leaching into waterways. It's contributed to dead zones in like the Gulf of Mexico, to name one. But it's polluting our waterways, the soil, and then air, as you mentioned. So these are documented conditions. And I live in California, and there's actually movement going on right now trying to figure out how to take care of this problem and reduce those levels of pollution.
I just had Mark Hyman on the show, and he said really where health is where when farmers become soil farmers. When farmers pay more attention to the health of the soil, that is when we get really healthy crops. And that's what's going to, sustain our health. It all comes back to the soil. And part of that, biodynamic farming is allowing the animals to walk on the fields during like the off season, and allow their manure to naturally be stomped into the ground. And biodynamic farms have a much higher yield of produce than those with a bunch of chemicals, right? Because they've figured out how to work with the soil instead of how to um just it's so like man to take a bunch of chemicals and try to force something to do it the way to bend its will like we're God. And instead of that very so-called conventional way of growing things, where we pour a bunch of chemicals and genetically modify plants to bend their will to what we want. And then uh and then we look at the opposite spectrum, which is the biodynamic farming, and it's like, okay, well, why don't we take a step back and go, God or universe or nature's really got to figure it out, and how can we help it? How can we help nature do what it's supposed to do best, which is really our ecosystem is so beautiful. I'm sure you're studying this, just how amazing our ecosystem is at taking care of that balance between all the gases, right? So between what we breathe out and what the plants breathe in, and how can we best support our food to grow sustainably, that leads to healthy soil 100 years from now, right?
I absolutely agree. It all starts with the soil. And I think a lot of people do not understand that a lot of times we think of soil as just this inert dirt. But soil is living and breathing, and we're so interested in our gut microbiome now, but the soil has a microbiome, and it's rich with all of these organisms that help decay the organic matter and contribute nutrients to the soil. And modern agriculture really treats soil as an inert substance, and it's like a recipe. Do you need phosphorus? Let's add this much phosphorus. Let's add this much nitrogen, instead of like trying to support that soil to be nourishing and to be, whole. So this view of agriculture where we're just treating soil like this is not only detrimental to the soil. Um, it produces runoff because when you're applying nitrogen, it just can't possibly get all absorbed in there, so it's running off into the waterways. And then all of these inputs a lot of times are fossil fuel generated, so there's more fossil fuel. We have a problem with some of them. We're running out of some of these things like phosphorus. We don't have enough in the world. So but at the same time, just compost has all the things, manures and compost, part of our natural environment, have all the things that are needed in terms of the nutrients of the soil, and it breaks down slowly and it adds organic material to the soil. So that's what nature has always used. That if you could really imagine the most beautiful ecosystem like this is when you walk into a forest. And when you walk into a forest, you see trees, and you never see exposed soil because it's always covered with decaying foliage. You have wild animals with manures from them, and like you said, stomping on the soil, loosening it up just enough, and you have this rich soil. And there's never an overgrowth of one particular pest because you have everything in balance. If you have bugs, you have something that eats the bugs, and then you have this amazing ecosystem. But when we get into our modern agriculture, well, you'll have one pest invade an entire crop because we don't have that balance anymore.
Mm. So tell us a bit about what, because I have absolutely no idea what your degree looks like. What is it that you study? And when you have completed your degree, what is it that you can do and how can you help us? How can you help the world?
Well, my degree really is looking at the food system. So I'm not micro focused on agriculture, although I'm learning a lot about agriculture. Like, you talked about biodynamic, I'm learning about that. Organic, even regenerative is a new term that we're using, which is beyond organic, where we're actually trying to regenerate the soil,
Mm.
actually improve it or restore it, Um, but also like food policy, looking at local food systems and also food security, all because sustainability goes beyond just the environment. A lot of us think of the environment as being the only aspect of sustainability, but sustainability means that we want our food system to move beyond and to be available for future generations. And that means healthful, affordable food that everybody has access to. So that would involve things like economics and society and community. So even things like food deserts, just because people who can afford it can go to the farmer's market and buy organic produce, that's not available to everybody in in our country. So I'm looking at this with all these different kinds of lenses, looking at the different aspects of how we could have a more just, sustainable food system. And when I'm done with it all, I really just see it kind of folding it into my work, because, being focused on plant-based nutrition, I think it's a very important part of that. It kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm doing in my work as a journalist and writing, and with my speaking on nutrition, being active in the dietitian world. Those are all things that I think people are really hungry for, and in the healthcare professional world, which I'm a part of, I think there's a lack of understanding on the food system. We're so focused on nutrients that sometimes we don't take it all the way back to the soil and how we're growing our food.
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting to see that. I mean, you could Google this and see that the amount of vitamins and the amount of minerals that are in our carrots or tomatoes or lettuce or spinach has decreased by upwards of 70% in the last 40 and 50 years. Like the food that our grandparents ate was 70% more nutrient dense than the food that we're eating. And it's like, do you remember what tomatoes taste like when you were a kid? Do you remember you bit into a tomato and it was you could just eat a tomato, like just pick it off a plant and just eat it, and it was more delicious than an apple. It had bursts with flavor. And now you eat a tomato and it tastes like cardboard. It tastes like nothing. There's no flavor, and you have to add lots of salt to it because there's just no flavor at all. It's really interesting how you farm the same. We allow farmers, we encourage farmers to farm the same crop over and over and over and over again. This is the so-called conventional way of doing it, which I think is so messed up. I've said this before. I think it's messed up that we call, spraying a bunch of chemicals on a field conventional and not spraying chemicals organic. We should call, that just like disgusting chemical filled food instead of call it conventional. And instead of organic, we should call that conventional because that's how we were growing things 100 years ago, 10,000 years ago. Um, but that's me on my soapbox. So here we have, this food, which when we've encouraged, and by encourage, I mean, we vote with our fork. So what we buy, so if we go to the grocery store and you buy the so-called conventional chemical filled food, we're supporting that system, right? We're supporting that farmer to continue that in that way and to continue in that manner, right? And also through legislation, it's just amazing how much subsidies go to corn and wheat, and it's not we don't in order to feed the cows, right? In order to continue a system that's polluting our bodies and our environment. I recently heard a statistic by a doctor. I was watching the heavy metal summit, and one of the doctors said they calculated that there's a 300 pounds of chemicals being dumped into our environment per person per day in the United States. Our food, our soil, our water. If you add up everything that big agra does and all of the other industries, but big agra is a big part of it, then per day, and it's can you imagine a 300-pound gallon of chemical toxic waste, toxic crap, beside you, and that's every single day per person per day. And we need to start voting with our fork. We need to make a change because that is, this isn't, we're not talking about our grandchildren or great grandchildren anymore. We're talking about our life in 20 years, our life in 20 years with that amount of chemicals. It's
Right.
going to add up. We've already see that the diabetes and cancer and like these heart disease, which, it's related to our food, but it's also related to the toxic environment, right? Cancer is 1 in 2 in men and 1 in 3 in women, I believe was the statistic. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So are you seeing in your degree as you're learning sustainable food systems, are you seeing the relationship between the amount of chemicals being introduced into our food system and our the impact on our health itself?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic, and um, just to mention that it is very intriguing that our crops that we're eating today do have fewer nutrients than they did 50 years ago. This has been well documented. I wanted to highlight that point, and this is for a few different reasons. One is that we've changed our varieties so much to the point, when you buy your orange carrots at the supermarket, that's one variety of carrots when nature produced many other varieties. And they think probably the first carrot was not orange, it was maybe yellow, is a different color, but that is conventional breeding, trying to get the one carrot that we want in the supermarkets that has the right characteristics. And oftentimes, those crop varieties that we have now are much lower in nutrients than their ancient relatives. So, if you
Mm-hmm.
found the relative of your favorite vegetable in the forest, it would have astronomical degrees of nutrients compared to the ones we have now. So we've just kind of like bred the nutrients out of the vegetables to try to get these other characteristics. Maybe we want a sweeter this or a different skin on this. And so that has bred out a lot of the nutrients. And then secondly, it's taking about 2 weeks for us to get our produce when at the supermarket. So when you eat your tomato that you talked about in the supermarket, it was picked 2 weeks ago probably, and we know that produce loses nutrients every day after being picked, and we know that produce has more nutrients when it's picked ripe. So this is really feeding into it. And then thirdly, there's now evidence that shows that climate change is changing the nutrient value of our vegetables, which has got everybody concerned because the temperatures are rising, so it's changing the actual composition of our produce in the fields. So, unfortunately, the only thing you can do about this is to eat more produce that's picked and harvested ripe. I love to go to the farmer's market where they actually picked it that morning. You can still see the dirt on the roots of the carrots. Grow your own food, eat more varieties. Don't always eat the same produce, and eat plenty of produce to make sure we're getting all those nutrients. And then, the whole input thing, the pesticides, my mother grew up on a farm. And this is, the influx of pesticides really came after World War II. And she grew up on a farm in World War II. And really, the poor farmers couldn't afford pesticides. It was just not part of what they did. So I asked my mom, what did your father do about, how did you guys take care of all the bugs? And her answer was, my dad had 3 kids in a bucket. And their job was to just go and pick the bugs, or they'd shake the plants and the bugs would fall in the bucket. So people had solutions for this, I mean, they've been farming for thousands of years, and they before pesticides were invented, but it is concerning. And the research, we need more research on the impact of pesticides on health. One of the things that concerns me the most is we do have research that shows the highest risk is of farming communities. They have higher risks of all these conditions
Mm-hmm.
because they are actually in there breathing this, working with it,
Mm-hmm.
living in these communities where it's in their water, their soil, their air. And if you care about the people who grow your food, that's one of the main reasons that I support organic agriculture, because I want to really also protect the people who are doing all that work to grow my food and have even a higher risk than other people have, because they're directly exposed to it.
You reminded me of what my naturopath, when I was pregnant, she's a midwife and a naturopath, and she used to be the dean of Bastyr University. So she's been doing it for over 30 years. And she said, I don't know why we were talking about this, but we got on the subject, and she said, over the mountains in Washington. So we're in Western Washington, and she said in Eastern Washington it's all farmland, right? In Western Washington it's like a sort of a rainforest. Actually, it is classified as a rainforest because we get so much rain, but just very different from on the other side of the mountains or the other side of the Cascades. We have more desert, prairie, farmland, and so very different ecosystem and perfect for farming. And she said the women who are pregnant at a certain time every year have a almost guaranteed that they'll give birth to a baby with a birth defect, because if they conceive at a certain amount of time during the farming season, when they spray the heaviest, and if they just live in town and they breathe in, like Sunnyside, Washington, and they breathe in the chemicals, then they're almost guaranteed that they'll have a birth defect. And it's something that is not widely publicized because uh, I don't know, how much of it's controlled by the agriculture, the big agra wanting to keep it under wraps. How much of it is Monsanto paying people off? We see the impact that Monsanto and its chemicals have on the environment and on the people, and on the farmers, and they'd rather pay people off out of court than let it really become known.
Right. We need more of this published, to get this really out there. It's been documented in Florida. I read about cases in Florida. I don't know if you saw those cases, where migrant farm workers in the tomato fields
Mm.
were the farmers were not following the protocols, because there are guidelines for pesticide application that are supposed to at least minimize, but if they weren't even being followed, and several farm workers who were pregnant had uh, almost the same birth defects in their infants, working in the fields. So they actually documented some cases of that. But we need more documentation of this to really, to support that, because it is so easy for us to say, we can sit here and buy our organic produce, and then looking at the system that supports this, that is inequitable, because the farm workers are usually low income. If they're migrant workers, they don't have a political voice. They can't complain. They can't say, oh, this isn't right. So there are a lot of issues with farm labor, and that's just one of the major reasons for me to continue to support organic. There are many other reasons, but it's
Hmm.
just one of those important ones.
You know what really opened my eyes was episode 89 with Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She's a PhD top research scientist from MIT, and although it's not her background, she became very interested in the link between glyphosate, which is Monsanto's Roundup, and the increase in autism, when she saw that the increase in our usage of glyphosate, if you look at that graph and you look, or the prevalence of glyphosate in our environment and our food, and you see that graph of the rates, in increase in autism, they're almost identical. And she said, listen, it's not like, you can't say just a correlation isn't causation, but that got her to look deeper, and with a bunch of other research scientists have looked deeper, and they've seen that because what glyphosate does is it's a chelator, so it binds to heavy metals, but it also releases heavy metals once the agent changes pH. So where does pH change in our body? When fluids change. So when fluids exchange, so the kidneys, when blood changes into urine is an example, and by the brain when blood changes to cerebral spinal fluid. And so what they're seeing, these scientists have seen, is that glyphosate will bind to mercury, for example, or aluminum. And it's in our body because we're eating it. We're eating the animals that eat it, because we spray it on, the for example, the corn, and the cow eats the corn, and so the cow's filled with glyphosate, and then we eat a nice glyphosate steak. And then we go out, we eat soy, for example. There's a lot of soy in everything, and that if it's GMO Roundup ready soy, then we're getting lots of glyphosate in that. And so then it accumulates in our body, but what happens is the glyphosate binds the heavy metals, and it releases the heavy metals at the kidneys and at the brain. And um and the where this really came into account was in Sri Lanka, when they were using, um they were not using glyphosate in their, right, to do the farming in the rice paddies, and they were using a different, they were using I can't remember it right now off the top of my head, but she discussed it, and it was nowhere near as detrimental. And then they started using glyphosate, and the glyphosate started causing kidney disease, massive kidney damage in all the farmers that were working in the rice paddies. And so when they finally figured out that it was because the glyphosate was delivering heavy metals to their kidneys and releasing it and making the kidneys just totally toxic, that Sri Lanka banned Monsanto completely in their entire country. And once they did that, they stopped using it. They were able to help the farmers get their health back, and that they could reverse the kidney disease. But there's entire countries that have now banned these chemicals, and yet we gladly pay for it every day. We gladly go to the grocery store and pay for our glyphosate steak and glyphosate filled, fruits and vegetables, because, like you said, it's not everyone can afford organic. And not everyone,
Mm.
knows that this information, knows how toxic their food is, because we have so many companies lobbying against us even knowing what's GMO. So it's really like, how do we change the system? How do we change it so that we can help those who can't afford it to be able to afford it? What are some strategies that we can do to start making a positive impact in the world?
Yeah, that's so interesting what you just talked about with the story with glyphosate. And um, I'm not aware of that. I'll have to read, listen in on that episode. But another concern is that glyphosate is, as you said, Roundup Ready, and the GMO crops, in particular, soy is the one that is using the glyphosate, because the genetically modified crops are resistant to the spraying of glyphosate, so they can spray glyphosate right on the crops and it kills the weeds. It doesn't kill the soy. So that's what the genetic breeding is for. But now glyphosate's not working anymore. The weeds have gotten resistant to it. So now they're developing the second generation of
Mm,
GMO crops using a different, I believe it's dicamba is what is the name of the next one that's already out there, because everybody knew that that was going to happen, that glyphosate wouldn't work anymore because nature has a way of evolving, so now the weeds have become resistant to glyphosate. So now we're going to have to start looking at the next herbicide that they're using to see what the implications are. And California has been pretty aggressive about trying to look at the risks of glyphosate, I know. But this is a real problem right now. I think that's one of the biggest problems that you mentioned facing the sustainable food movement is how do we make it affordable to everyone? And one of the issues is that we have one of the cheapest food supplies in the world when you look at the percentage of our income that goes to food. So we're so used to buying cheap
mm-hmm.
food, um, and it's hard for people to pay a little bit more, um, and get higher quality food. But I like to remind people that, well, Americans eat a lot of food too. We eat more than we need. So, I mean, there's an opportunity for us to eat more of what we need every day and not waste so much. We're wasting
Mm-hmm.
40% of our food. So we are so used to these large portions and we're throwing it away. So what if we ate only what we needed and didn't waste our food and consider our food to be a little more precious,
Mm.
and put more value in it and actually attributed more of our income, because around the world they are spending more of their income on food than we do as a percentage. So we're just in this cheap food mindset that we would have to somehow change. Maybe we don't need to go to the mall and buy as many clothes or like the latest gadget, and put more value on our food. And I know that doesn't answer the question for everybody, because we have so many food insecure people in the United States who literally do not have enough food to feed their families, and that's a huge conundrum. Although a lot of people don't realize that we have programs in farmers markets where it's like double dollars, where your like SNAP benefits can apply for twice the amount at participating farmers markets. So there are programs out there if we can connect people to these to get more healthy produce there.
Mm. Well, what I'm doing right now is we're preparing to start a garden, and it's going to be maybe about 50 feet by 50 feet, which can make a lot of vegetables. And I know we're gonna end up we're gonna be growing so many vegetables that more than we could ever eat and our friends. So we're gonna help our friends and family. And then all of what's left, I want to donate to our food bank. We have a local food bank here that gladly accepts fresh produce from farms and gardens. And there's actually and this is something that is in other cities, and so listeners could do this. You can turn your front yard or your backyard, no matter how big or small, or even your patio in an apartment, into a garden. You would be surprised at how much you can grow in a kiddie pool full of dirt. Like, it is amazing how much kale you can grow in a kiddie pool full of dirt, or how many tomatoes you can get from a few pots. But we should all grow something. And then if you have any leftovers, there's these little groups that will get together and do an exchange. So let's say you grow a bunch of kale and this other person grows a bunch of broccoli. You guys could change. So you could exchange. Or if you have leftovers, this group gets together, it collects it all and donates it to families in need. And I just, every time I drive by a church and I see, like, we have a few churches out here with like just a field of grass, and I think, what a waste. What why and they mow it every week. What a waste. Why doesn't that church create a garden? And all, like, churches love volunteering, and they could create a garden and grow some fresh food for all of the people in our area that can't afford it. Can you imagine if every church got a group of volunteers to make a garden to grow food for the church and for the community? How many people would be fed? And what about
Yeah, I
public
love
spaces?
that.
Like, what if
Right.
every school took some of their field, and really got serious about making a big vegetable garden and made that be part of the education, really hands-on education, and also part of, because think about it, agriculture and science, and home economics, right? And then also health. And they
Right.
could take that food and they could incorporate it into the school meals. I know we've got all this red tape and all these regulations and around changing the school menus, and it's really there to protect, McDonald's and Kellogg's and Pepsi and Nestle, so that they can get their products into the school system instead of actually protect the nutritional needs of the children. Kind of drives me crazy. Are you this, you've been learning a lot about legislation. What steps can we take to start making a positive impact on the school systems?
Well, I love what you talked about with the school gardens, and I'm seeing more movement there. And what's you even talked about like urban gardens and using public spaces. There's a lot going on in this area, and a lot of it is grassroots, where you will just get a parent at their school who will just go in and say, "I want a school garden." And I'm willing to get a committee together, and these are things are happening all over America. Or you'll
Mm.
find these movements where there'll be a vacant lot in a urban area, and people are saying we want a community garden there. And so you're finding this popping up all over with passionate people getting groups together. And I'm a huge fan of community gardens where you'll have a public space where the community is set aside and anybody can come in there. Each community garden can be set up differently. Sometimes you get your own little plot for a tiny fee, and if you live in an apartment, you could just have your family and grow your own food. Or some of them you could just walk in there anytime you want and plant something and harvest something. I've had the honor of seeing Alice Waters' school garden. She has a program called the Edible Schoolyard. She
Hmm.
started in Berkeley. You can look it up online very easily. And she started one in New Orleans in one of the poorest neighborhoods after Katrina. And I saw the whole program. It's amazing. She restored an entire community by uplifting the school and having a school garden, having classes, food, cooking classes, nutrition classes, and the doors are open to the garden in the community. So the community can just walk in and harvest an eggplant if they want, or volunteer and dig in the dirt for a little bit. So I think that it's going to take all of us, working together in all of these sorts of avenues. There are a lot of passionate people out there and a lot of organizations with resources. You could Google and find all of these school garden. There's funding for this. There's grants out there. But also, I love what you said about everybody should grow a little bit of food.
Hmm.
If you look at our history in America and also in many countries, everybody grew their own fruits and vegetables.
Hmm.
I mean, that was just what we did. I mean, it was basically free food. You would have your kitchen garden, and in the summer, you'd have more than you could ever have. So you would can before freezing, or you dry the produce, and that would last you through the winter. You put things in your root cellar, and those were basically free foods for people. And somewhere along the way, we lost our connection to agriculture. But just a couple centuries ago, everybody had their own kitchen garden.
I love
So,
that idea.
not a couple, I mean, a couple generations ago.
Right. It
Sorry.
was so it was just a few years ago. I mean, if we look at the victory gardens, World War One and World War Two, we were really encouraged to grow a vegetable garden to help the war effort, right? And then something shifted
Right.
after that. We sort of became little spoiled brats, and we wanted everything, we wanted the TV dinners, right? Remember that like whole 1950s like TV dinner thing just started to come in. And I think after World War II, we kind of wanted it easy. We wanted to be little spoiled brats and just have a just kick put up our feet and rest for a while. And also, once we're given something easier, so like natural medicine was really put by the wayside when penicillin came in. Oh, you mean I don't have to rest for a month to get better? I can just take an injection or I can just take a pill? And then the marketing behind that, because now, no, great, now that there's a whole industry, I can make a bunch of money, or these companies can make a bunch of money. um feeding into this desire that humans have to be as lazy as possible. And that's just our genetic makeup. Our genetic makeup is at the reptilian brain level. It's to eat as much food as we possibly can, procreate, and then rest as much as possible to conserve our energy for the next time we need to hunt or mate, right? Or fight to survive.
Right.
And so unfortunately, we if we let our unconscious, if we just go unconscious in life, we end up making choices that are the laziest choices possible. And that's right now what we got to do is we got to stop buying microwavable food. We got to stop buying the easiest foods. We have to put a little bit more effort, because now we're realizing that the laziest way to do it has now become the unhealthiest way for ourself and the planet, and we're driving our health into the ground because we've been going through the drive-through, instead of putting our fingers in the soil and growing some food for ourselves, or supporting the local farmers that do. I love Hawaii as a great example. If anyone's been to Hawaii, they've seen it. Everyone has fruit trees. Almost everyone has a garden. I mean, just if you could go to Hawaii and drive around and go to the fruit stands and go to the farmers markets, almost everyone lives off the land on some capacity. It's because it's so expensive to live in Hawaii. I just looked at a graph. It said that in order to afford rent, you have to make $35 an hour on average, and it's so expensive to live there. Of course, they're growing their food year round, but also it's incredibly healthy. And Hawaii, is a very healthy state compared to other states, because of the amount of fresh produce that they do consume.
There's been a huge movement in Hawaii to bring back local food, what you're talking about, and I'm excited because Hawaii, they were eating this really poor diet for a while, and they've done research on it that was based kind of on this colonial type diet, eating spam and white rice and things that weren't even part of their local food tradition. And now
Mhm.
there's been this huge movement to return to the local foods, to grow your own food because they have an amazing growing climate.
Mhm.
The soils are beautiful. So I love what's going on in Hawaii. And if everybody could really go back to that a little bit, because all over the United States, we have things that grow. I live in California, so I'm really lucky. We have the Mediterranean climate. We can grow all sorts of things. But, in my dad grew up in Minnesota. In the summer, their vegetable garden had everything in it: beans and cabbages and root vegetables and peas. And they have a short growing season, but his mother grew all their vegetables, even in Minnesota, and
Mm.
canned them all and put things up in the root cellar. So everybody, no matter your growing climate, you can grow some things and get connected, and a lot of people just don't even know how to do it, but it's fun. And we have research that shows that people who garden, do home gardening, vegetable gardening, are happier, they're healthier. So you're getting out there, getting some vitamin D, you're engaged with nature, and the food is so good. You're so proud of it. You enjoy it when you grow it yourself. Um, so it's all good. And you don't have to have a huge garden. Like you said, a little kiddie pool or one bed. You can buy these at the hardware stores now, the little vegetable container beds. That's an easy way to start.
Mhm.
And just start with a couple of plants, and you're going to see how fun it is and how good you eat. It's a great way to get going.
I just saw this yesterday at Costco. My local Costco is selling for $60. It's two beds. It's this really cool plastic thing that maybe it's like 5 by 5. I'm just based on my memory, I'm guessing it's like maybe 4.5 or 5 by 5, and you just stick it into the ground and then fill that area with dirt, and you're ready to go. You're ready to garden, and there's so much you could grow in that. But even growing indoors, let's say you're in Alaska, although you can grow something outside in the summertime, you could be growing all year round with some like hydroponics, for example. So that there are ways to play with it, um, which is it's really exciting to the idea of getting. I can't wait to get my fingers in the dirt. I just interviewed Johan Hari, who he actually did a TED talk on. Um, the cause, the true root cause of addiction. And what led him, and it's actually fascinating, I'm going to be publishing this soon, but what led him down this path was that he was, a lot of his family members were addicts, and he grew up, like, why can't I wake up mommy? Or, why can't I wake up Uncle George? Like, what's going on? Because they were passed out from, whatever drugs or alcohol. And so he dived into like, what is the root cause of addiction, addictive behavior. And then from there, he was led into, well, what's the root cause of depression? And what he uncovered was one of the solutions, one of the really the true solutions to curing depression is gardening and community and creating community gardens. That there are entire therapy groups that you just get, like, you don't have to talk to each other, just go garden together. He says what naturally happens is they naturally, if you get like 10 or 12 people to tend a garden every week together, naturally, you don't have to, no instructions. You tell them just go do this, right? You don't tell them they have to talk to each other. They eventually want to start talking to each other because you're out in a garden, and so you just start becoming friends, and eventually those people end up supporting each other and becoming friends and wanting to help each other, and they help solve each other's problems. And then by the time the harvest season is done, none of them have depression anymore. They've spent time outside in nature, getting sunlight, getting the vitamin D. They've been eating healthier foods, and they've been making human connection and making friends. And so they see time and time again that this is a really a viable therapy for completely reversing depression, and that the root cause of depression, one of the root causes, is that we are now missing this key element of being human in our life, that we are missing connection to earth, connection to our environment, connection to each other.
Yeah, I love that story. And I think it's so valuable, this connection. It's most of our history was involved with collecting food. Most of us, our ancestors were farmers, and it was just part of our daily life. And we're so disconnected now. I've volunteered in schools to teach nutrition classes to kids. And one of my favorite things is just to bring in a basket of produce, and I'm astonished. Like I've showed kids an orange, and they don't know, they've never seen an orange
Oh my
before, because
gosh.
they've seen orange juice, but they've never seen an orange. I've shown them a potato, and they've never seen a potato. They've only seen French fries. So, this whole connection that these foods actually grow in the soil, and they're alive, and there's a little flower, and then it's pollinated, and all this whole story is so interesting for kids. And we have to expose this to people before we lose all of our connections with the soil and with our food. I think when you're also growing your food, you value it more because you spend a lot of time, prepare it, nourishing it, and you don't want to waste that beautiful cauliflower that you just picked and nourished and watched grow. So we're reducing our food waste, no food miles at all. And if you really get to look at sustainability, I mean, most farmers saved their seeds, so these were
Hmm.
basically zero impact. I mean, you saved your seeds. My mother still does that from your favorite plant, and grow it the next year. So it's 0 miles, zero impact, completely free. And of course, that's like for the expert. You don't have to do that. I start from transplants, whatever it takes for you to start gardening is such a valuable thing. But that connection to the soil is so important.
Yeah, I decided that I was just gonna go do it, and I know I'm not doing it like 100% right. Like, I know that there's a bunch of things I should be doing. Like, maybe I should be using mulch, or maybe I should be using some kind of compost. And I've just decided that year one, the first year with my garden, I'm just gonna go and do it. No barriers to entry. We went on Craigslist, and we found a guy who, for a few $100s, will bring his John Deere tractor over, and will clear all the sod away, and will till the earth, and will drill posts, holes for the posts to go in, because we want to put some chicken wire up to keep the deer and the we have deer and bunnies in our backyard, because kind of live
Hmm.
we live about half an hour outside the city. So we will definitely have critters wanting to eat eat our food. and um
Yes.
and so for a few $100s, we got a guy who's going to do all, like, I couldn't imagine, removing all the sod by hand. I know we would if we had
Yeah.
to, but luckily, We found a guy who'll do it, and I looked on Craigslist, there's a bunch of people who would. So if someone wants to start a garden in their backyard and they're not gonna do the raised beds, which I love raised beds, but because we're gonna do, 50 by 50, I've decided, we probably just do it in the soil that we already have. And
Mhm.
but yeah, it's just like no barriers to entry. Just go and do it. I figured, you know what, I'm going to learn along the way. I'm probably a year from now going to be like, wow, that was a learning experience. And I'm looking forward to that. I'm really looking forward to kind of winging it and just seeing what I can get with, because I know that I could get so caught up in, well, I got to do this and I got to do that, that I'll put it off. And I don't want to put it off. I just want to jump in and do it. I took out a bunch of books at the library on how to garden, and it's fun looking through them, but I keep seeing all these things like I should do this, I should do that. No, I'm just gonna go out there, I'm gonna throw seeds in the ground, and I'm gonna water it and see what happens. And it'll be fun to see, just like with the minimal amount of effort. I'll put effort into it, obviously, but with the least amount of effort, how much food I can grow, and then go from there. Because I think that a lot of people think it's hard because it's like the millennials who've never boiled an egg. They think cooking is so hard they never try. And it's cooking is so like cooking delicious food is really easy. It just takes learning. And the learning, if you know how to drive a car, like if you learned how to drive how to ride a bike, you can learn this. And so I want to like remove that fear of doing something new. And so I'm just going to get out there, I'm going to throw seeds in the ground, I'm going to see what happens, and I'm not going to be afraid to of something new, because I think if all of us just turned our backyard or our front yard into a garden, or like a little 5 by 5 or a little 10 by 10, and turn that into a garden, how much more health could we get, for our family. Also, kids who don't eat vegetables, they'll eat the vegetables that they grow. That's really exciting. um you've been learning so much from your course. Can you share what are some tidbits, what are some really exciting things that you've learned lately while you've been going through your master's in sustainable food systems?
Well, to kind of piggyback on what you're doing, I think it's so wonderful. And I just hope everybody out there can be inspired to just do anything to grow your own food, whether it's just, as I said, start with a pot of tomato plant in a pot. Um, and you're right, it's not as difficult as it can be. And even though in my education, I am learning about also home gardening as well. And we are seeing a rise in interest in home gardening. More Americans are home gardening right now. So this is
Nice.
catching on. That's really, it's nice to see. But, for example, composting is probably one of the best things you could do for your soil. Plus, it solves another problem is we're not putting food into the landfill, because food on its own produces methane. Wasted food in landfills is producing methane, which is climate change, creating climate change and contributing to it. So one of the things that could be really important is to start a compost bin. And basically, you can compost any organic material. That would be like your vegetable trimmings, moldy bread, anything, any type of food ingredient that tops of carrots, whatever. Just I have a bin underneath my sink that I collect everything in, and once a day I take it out to my compost pile. Depending on where you live, you could have wild animals attracted to your compost pile. So I have a closed one, and I've never had animals in there. And that is my nutrition for my vegetable garden. I have a large vegetable garden, and it supplies a lot of our produce for our family. So that's a great way to contribute nutrients to your soil, plus help your trash, your waste stream. So, and you can grow organically. I've studied the benefits of organic agriculture, and I'm a believer in that. So that's another thing you can do is you can grow your own organic food. So when you're really producing your food with no chemical pesticides or fertilizers, then you have an organic vegetable garden. So that's about as inexpensive as it can get for you producing your own organic food.
Mhm.
Sometimes like one of the biggest pieces of advice I have is to know your area. So I live in Southern California, you live in Washington. So doing a little research, finding out, okay, what grows really well and what time of year should I plant it? And what are my pests? Which pests do I have to watch out for? Which bugs, those kinds of things. Um, Having beneficial plants and bugs, like ladybugs will help keep down pests like aphids. So having also beneficial plants around your garden that maybe attract pollinators, like some trees, things like that attract birds, and birds will eat the bugs, that kind of thing. So creating this ecosphere in your own
Mm.
backyard that is friendly to your vegetables. So those are some of the things that you can do, and it's really exciting to see how it all works together. For example, I have to fight some pests in my vegetable garden, but I have in Southern California, we have lizards everywhere, and the lizards love my vegetable garden and they eat bugs, they gobble them up.
Nice.
So, like encouraging, that's what this ecosphere balance is, when where we're encouraging this system. I have birds all over and they eat just pounds of bugs. So I want the birds, but then of course, I have to protect my grapes because they'll eat up all my grapes. But so I throw a little cloth on them when they're ripe. But anyway, just fostering that eco balance in your own backyard as you're gardening is a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And what other really fun things can we do to support our own health and the environment?
Well, one of the things that people really don't stop to think about is the impact of processed foods we got on our health. That's been widely publicized when we're eating highly processed foods. And that I like to say foods that have lost their connection with Mother Nature. So when you eat an apple, that's a whole food. You can see the little stem that it came from, that it was once attached to the tree. So that's a whole food the way nature intended, with the skin. But then when you're drinking apple juice, now the skin has been removed, the fiber. And then if you're eating apples in a pie, now we've added more ingredients and sugar. So that just shows this level of processing that occurs. And when we eat whole foods, they're the most sustainable foods for our health as well as the planet, because all the farmer had to do was pick that fruit and get it to you. But every time we start processing things, and we have to ship those things far away to be processed, and then we have to add other ingredients that come from all over the world, until the average dinner plate in America has traveled 1,500 miles
Oh my
for the
gosh.
ingredients in an average meal, to get to our dinner table, because of all of this processing. But when you eat whole foods that really come with no package, if you think about it, when you buy that apple, you just pick it up at the store or the farmer's market, no package needed. So those foods that are whole are not only good for us, but they are the most sustainable for the planet, because there's no packaging, less food miles, less processing, all of those things that are required, to get that food to your plate or to your kitchen. So I think that's one of the important things that you could do for your health as well as the environment. And then, of course, eating more of that plant-based diet, which we talked about earlier, because we know that the animal foods contribute the most negatively to our environment. And we know that eating a high animal food diet is not good for our health. And Americans are the number one consumer of meat per capita in the planet. We are number one.
Mm.
So I always like to encourage people, what if you could just cut that in half? I mean, just think what you could do for animal welfare, for your health, reducing all that saturated fat, um, and then also the health of the planet because of the carbon footprint and the water footprint from animal food. So, even if you don't want to go all the way, just start cutting it in half. We studies show that you can significantly cut your carbon footprint just by, being more of a semi-vegetarian or a flexitarian.
Yeah, yeah, I know. My husband refuses to be called a vegan, although he's eating a vegan diet. I think because he just doesn't want the stigma of being vegan. So he calls himself meatless, which is to me it's the same thing. Um, and for me, I feel like I'm just a bad vegan because I'm occasionally eating eggs, and like occasionally, I mean like once a week eating it, maybe once a week, maybe once a month eating chicken. I've just had it a few times, and it's more like my like we'll buy some chicken for our son and at a restaurant, and then there'll be a little bit left on his plate, and I'll like have the rest of it. And I'm thinking to myself, well, like my body, sometimes my body just goes, hey, you know what, that'd be okay, I'm okay with that. But I'm eating like 4 ounces of meat a week, as opposed to I was eating like 8 ounces, 12 ounces a meal, like, like sometimes that much a
Yeah.
meal. I mean, you're right. We really
Hmm.
eat, and we have listeners from all around the world, but most of them are in the United States. We really do eat a crazy amount of meat. And didn't we discuss in our first interview meatless Mondays, like different strategies for just trying a little bit less meat? That idea of just try one day a week, like where the whole family just decides they're gonna eat the plant based for one day, or choose that your breakfast and your lunches are filled with plants, all kinds of legumes, nuts, beans, seeds, vegetables, and fruit, and then your dinner has meat, or choose one meal that doesn't have meat. Like just start somewhere and just slowly back off and just see where you're comfortable. You don't have to go full hog vegan, but my husband wanted to just try it and see how it would feel. And we were totally open to like hating it on day 3 and going back to eating meat at the end of every meal, but that's not what happened. And that's because I made sure that we always had that really balanced plate, that we always had some either beans or legumes or some kind of starch, like carrots or sweet potato, and to balance out the all the vegetables. And so we just really felt full at every meal. It was great, and just really satisfied, really satiated. I didn't think we would, because we were so used to being satiated by a heavy, fatty, meaty meal.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the idea if you're thinking about going more plant-based to start with Meatless Monday like you mentioned. I think that's a great way. I hear from a lot of people that they do well with small steps. So, starting with like one day a week, and a lot of times people have their best behaviors on Monday because we always start the week fresh, and you've probably been grocery shopping over the weekend, so you have a nice full pantry of healthy food. So just starting it with one day a week, and just start thinking about your plate differently, that it doesn't have to be a meal. If this idea that we have to have a hunk of meat on our plate or it's not a meal, we just need to think past that. And one of my other favorite tips is, if you look at cultures around the world, they rarely eat that meal with a hunk of meat. Their meals are usually mixed. If they use animal food, it's like a little bit in a whole dish, maybe a stew or a stir fry, you know, uh, uh, combined with beans, those kinds of things, where it's just almost like a flavoring. So that's, you could seriously cut your animal food intake just by starting to do that, where you use one portion for a whole family meal. But it's all about the plants then. The meat is just a seasoning then. So that's another way, you can kind of like start approaching this idea of cutting back on animal foods and increasing the whole plant foods.
Mark Hyman said, "Make meat your condiment." And I thought that was really cool to think of it as a condiment rather than as the center of the plate of the whole meal. It's like it's just this tiny, like you said, it's just the flavoring. It's not the whole meal. I got really creative with making our own vegan burgers. So I was playing around with, because it's just so easy to make a patty. And then we don't even like eat bread to begin with because we're gluten free, and just even eating gluten free bread, just it's just so processed that anytime we do eat a lot of gluten free bread, we all balloon up. So we're like, okay, like let's just stay away from the processed food. Even gluten free bread is not always the healthiest thing to do, any kind of bread, because the more you process a grain, the more you're removing the fiber, and then it becomes just higher on the glycemic index. So it's better just eat the whole grain as a whole, right? We'll make these fun patties, and then I will wrap them up in like cabbage or lettuce, or just have it on the plate with other things, and they're really delicious. It's sort of like a falafel. I make some quinoa and some chickpeas. And the last time I mixed so it's equal parts quinoa, chickpeas, and cauliflower that's I've sort of riced the cauliflower. You put it through a food processor or a blender, and you just get it to be like little bits. And you don't have to cook the cauliflower in advance. And I just took the riced cauliflower, mixed it with the cooked quinoa, so it's really sticky. I make the kind of sticky cooked quinoa, and so just add a little bit less water so it's more sticky, and then let it cool, of course, and then I added like a taco seasoning to it, so like a Tex-Mex seasoning, and then with my hands I just mixed it all together. You can take the chickpeas and like blend them. I actually put them in the blender first just to try to break them up a bit more, make them more mushy. And so between the mushiness of the chickpeas, the mushiness of the quinoa, it really binded well with all the seasoning and with the cauliflower, and then I made them up into like sort of like falafels and then flattened them so they're like maybe like mini patties. And I tried baking them and they turned out delicious. I tried just pan sautéing them and they also turned out delicious. They were so good. My husband like ate all of them. They were really, really good. And then we had
They
them the next.
sound
Yeah,
wonderful.
so I baked, like, a whole bunch of them, and I had them out on the counter, and I told my husband I was gonna, like, make burgers out of them, like, I wrapped them basically, I put a piece of, avocado on them and then wrapped it in purple, cabbage, just uncooked purple cabbage. Because the what you get is the sweetness. Purple cabbage is so sweet, you get the sweetness and the crunch of the purple cabbage, and then that buttery softness of the avocado, and then that nice spicy kick of the burger, and it was so good that my husband went back and he ate all of them, even though I was sort of planning that that would be dinner, and it was like 2 p.m. They were all gone. I had to make another batch. So, they're really good. And I kind of yelled at him. I'm like, "That was what we were having dinner." And he's like, "But they were so good. I couldn't help myself." Like they're really good, and they're also really healthy. It's okay, it's okay if you like overeat vegetables like a little bit. It's not like you're gonna. It's like overeating a steak, right? It's totally different. So if you're starting to crave carrots, if you're starting to crave broccoli, you should eat more. Your body knows what it needs. And when you start what I notice is when we've gone more plant-based, my body's telling me like, "Ah, I want a cabbage salad." Like I just cut up a bunch of cabbage and mix it with some spinach and make my own dressing out of I've been getting into vinegars more, and I never ever ever liked vinaigrettes. But when I learned from Dr. Esselstyn, I had him on the show recently, and he said that there's an acid in vinegar that actually heals the lining of our arteries. And it's the only thing he knows of on the planet that actually heals the lining of the arteries. And so he thinks that everyone in every meal should have some kind of balsamic vinegar or some kind of vinegar. And so I've just been
Mm,
implementing, figuring out ways of getting more vinegar, like apple cider vinegar and balsamic, into my diet, knowing how healing it is, and also really delicious. So playing around with that, um, my taste buds have changed. I used to in the past, like 7 years ago, hated vegetables, loved takeout, like loved, any kind of drive-through takeout, right? Like totally standard American taste buds. And after getting more whole foods, I noticed that, like, for example, to just bite into a raw cabbage, just take some purple cabbage and just bite into it and just notice what it tastes like. It is sweet, it is delicious, it's crunchy, it's like a lot of fun. I love cutting up a cabbage and like to like little squares and using that as a cracker in the hummus instead of an actual cracker. Not because I'm like looking to be more low carb, just because it is so delicious. It's more delicious than any processed food. Because think about it, crackers are processed, right? Highly processed foods.
mhm,
Whereas you can cut up vegetables and actually just taste how delicious the vegetable is. And I think that our taste buds originally were evolved to help us make food choices that would be the most nutritious for us. And processed foods have been altered to trick your taste buds into thinking that McDonald's is really good for you, that Starbucks is really good for you, that processed food's really good for you. They're just tricking our taste buds. And if we go back to whole food eating, that our taste buds will start to tell us, "Oh, I really need the iron in this spinach, or I really need the calcium in this broccoli." Like our taste buds are really going to guide us down that path.
yeah, I agree with you. And, research shows that you can train your taste buds that, that people that have reduced salt or sugar intake can gradually reduce their preference level for sweet and salty. So I do believe that we can change the way we view delicious foods. I know I agree with you completely because when I'm traveling and I'm not eating my normal diet, I just start craving vegetables because you can never get enough vegetables when you're traveling. It's always, I want a plate full of them. I don't want just a little tomato slice on the side. And, so my body and my palate is craving it. So when you really get used to these whole foods, my morning breakfast is always a porridge. I like oatmeal porridge, and then I use whatever fruit is in season. That's my sweetener, and I put some flax and walnuts,
Mm.
um, and some plant-based milk. That's my go-to breakfast. No sugar whatsoever, just whatever. This morning I had half a banana, but I just think that's the perfect amount of sweetness. But every once in a while, you know, I've been traveling and you get like an oatmeal that somebody makes and they've added sugar and it's just sickening sweet to me.
Yeah.
I just because my taste buds have changed and I don't prefer that anymore. So it is true that we can shape this. And I think once you start eating this way, my kids have been eating in this way their whole life, and now they're in their early 20s. But they just find fast food to just really taste unacceptable, and they don't like the taste of it. They weren't raised that way, so it's funny how I don't find that appealing. I can see a commercial on TV for some greasy burger, and I don't find that appealing at all. Because but show me a picture of a beautiful salad with all the fresh produce, and I'll just be watering. My mouth will be watering over it. And I also have to say that your veggie burgers sound amazing. I want to try that
Yeah,
with the cabbage the way you described it.
I'm kind of the type of person that, I mean, I like looking at recipes as a guide, but then I want to just play. And the thing about baking is you have to, like, baking is science. You have to follow the recipe. You really do. And whereas cooking, you can kind of just wing it, just go, oh, okay, here's the flavor profile I'm kind of moving towards. You don't have to measure everything out. And that's why I really am not a great baker, but I think I'm a really good cook because I love experimenting, and it's okay if we experiment and we fail. We have to learn from it. So it's not like every dish I make is the best, but I thought to myself, like, what could be like a plant-based burger that would be fun? I just started experimenting and just playing around. The next one I want to tackle is the black bean burger because they can be so hearty and so delicious, and I just don't want to pay for them anymore. I want to figure out how to make it myself.
Yeah.
A Trader Joe's has a plant-based burger that I really, really love. It does have a lot of oil in it, so it's not. I mean, it is processed, but it's kind of like my version of junk food. It's pea protein, and it's a pea protein burger at Trader Joe's. So if anyone shops at Trader Joe's, check it out. It's actually really, I think it's really delicious. That's what I had for breakfast this morning on my salad. I had a giant bowl of avocado, and I cut up zucchini, and raw zucchini is delicious. Just cut up a zucchini and chickpeas and it's spinach, and then a mixed variety of lettuce, and then I put this pea protein burger on top with my apple cider vinaigrette. I mixed a tart cherry juice, which anyone who has uric acid issues or gout, just start drinking tart cherry juice because the tart cherry juice eliminates the uric acid, helps to neutralize it. And so I made a tart cherry juice vinaigrette, mixing tart cherry juice and the apple cider vinegar, and it was amazing. I mean, and you talked about reducing salt and sugar. We rarely add salt, and we don't add any sugar to our food. And what I noticed is now I can start to taste the salt in food because there's salt in vegetables. And so
Hmm.
if you can start to taste the sweetness and the saltiness in the plants itself, which is really exciting. But it does take down regulating the neuroreceptors of salt and sugar. It does take that little transition time to get used to coming off of. It's sort of like what we've been eating is like we've been doing heroin, right? Like we've been doing speed, and we've been doing meth, and we've been doing all these kind of drugs. Like when you think about how we eat, like a standard American diet is like doing a bunch of drugs, and then all of a sudden we're asking someone to be sober. And that's like going from eating McDonald's to eating like an organic plate of vegetables is like asking someone to stop doing speed and start just like going for a walk and breathing air, right? It's just like it's two totally different
Right.
modes, the body and the brain, were in like crazy excitotoxin mode, and now we're asking them just to go back to being human and being normal, right? And so at first it's kind of a weird transition, but you have some really great books where you teach people how to do this. Let's talk a little bit about your book so that listeners know the kind of resources that you provide. Um, you have Plant Powered for Life, and you have the Plant Powered Diet. What we talked about this in episode 197, but just for listeners who haven't heard episode 197, tell us a little bit about your books and the resources that you provide for people who may be interested in starting to incorporate being more plant-based in their life.
Yes, well, my first book is The Plant Powered Diet, and I kind of call it the Bible of plant based eating. So, if you're interested in starting to eat more of a plant based diet, and no matter what that looks like to you, whether it's doing Meatless Monday, becoming a semi vegetarian, a flexitarian, or a vegetarian or a vegan, I kind of put that on a spectrum of plant based eating. But I give you all the tools that you would need to start shifting your plate and start eating more of a plant based diet based on whole foods. So I have information on where you're going to get your plant proteins, how to choose whole grains in their intact form, the ones you were talking about before, how many vegetables you should be eating every day, and as well as fruits, and using herbs and seeds to add herbs and spices to add flavoring, nuts and seeds to add more protein and healthy fats. So, that really gives you the basics. And then my second book is called Plant Powered for Life. And that book is really kind of an easy approach to everything that was in the plant powered diet, and a very easy kind of 52 rules. And you could just take one rule every day, every week, and within 1 year, you could go through each rule. And then I have a kind of a cookbook that goes along with that, with recipes, with photography that kind of highlight, how to do this plant-based eating lifestyle. So recipes in all the different categories, whether it's breakfast, healthy desserts, snacks, lunch, beverages, those kinds of things, entrees. And then I have my website with a blog, SharonPalmer.com, or the Plant Powered Dietitian is my blog. I have a daily blog where I post art eating the plant lifestyle tips and ways, to move that direction, and also a lot of recipes there. I have a free newsletter people can sign up for too, that would help inspire you down this plant-based journey.
Awesome. And of course, all the links that Sharon just mentioned are going to be in the show notes of today's podcast. So you can access her newsletter and her blog, and check out her books, because I think they're wonderful books. Now, what I didn't mention at the beginning is that you're a registered dietitian. I mean, you really have a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience in this movement. And I love that you're marrying this the aspect of health coming from a dietitian standpoint to your now new degree in sustainable food systems, that you're marrying these two concepts, this idea that we need to look that health is more than what's on our plate, that what's on our plate is a fraction of our health, and that our health incorporates the health of the soil, the health of our ecosystem, the health of the air, the health of our water. It incorporates so much more, and so our food choices are what's going to influence what happens in this world. So if we get, let's say, 10,000 listeners or 100,000 listeners to choose local organic, that's going to start to put this dent in funding the big agra dumping chemicals and really it's going to put a dent in that unsustainable model, and it's going to start to impact and fund the sustainable model that helps our health right now. And so the more we get this out, the more we spread this information, the more we share this podcast, for example, the more we tell our friends and family to follow Sharon and to keep, maybe reading her books and following her blog, the more we can get this information out there and wake people up, the more we can help our local ecosystem right now, that we can help and support more farmers to do local organic right now, right, for our health, for our community, for the community health, but also for the planet. So it's this weird and interesting woven dynamic where everything is interconnected. We can't just take ourselves out of the balance of the ecosystem. We don't rise above it. We're not separate from it. I always think of the Jetsons, like that. Oh, we just ruin the planet, so we build giant houses in the sky, and we just ignore the impact on the world. We can't live that way. It's not how it works. Every single choice that we make around our health, whether we choose to buy food from Chile, for example, where like my son loves grapes and I will only ever buy him organic grapes. But I refuse to buy grapes that have been flown 3,000 miles to get to for him to eat, because I just think it's like that's kind of that little spoiled brat that wants whatever it wants and doesn't care about the impact on the world. I think that Chileans should eat the Chilean grapes, for example, or the Argentinians should eat their Argentinian grapes. I don't think that we should export food for pleasure around the world. I just, that is something I'm not going to support. I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to put my dollars into that. So we should look at where food comes from, and continue to support our local agriculture, because that just makes common sense, because I want cleaner air for myself and for my children, but I really want cleaner air for myself. So I want the listener to know that they want cleaner air and cleaner soil and cleaner water and cleaner food, that every single time they go to the grocery store, they can make that choice by voting with their fork, and together we can really make that impact. Um Sharon, do you have any final words for us when it comes to making these changes or making a global impact? What actions can we take right now? Are there actions you want all of us to take right now that would start to really help both our health and the health of the environment?
Well, I love what you just said about, voting for your dollar and voting with your fork, with your dollars. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that we can do. And food companies take notice of this. When we want ingredients out of the products, they change. They change the ingredients. When people post on social media the things that they're interested in, people are observing this. But also, voting for your dollar by supporting local agriculture is probably one of the most powerful things you can do in your own lifestyle, is to buy produce that's from your local community. You're keeping your dollars in your community. You're reducing your food miles. You're reducing all of the transportation and the processing that's required to bring those grapes from Chile, as you mentioned. So that's a really important thing to do. Growing some of your own food, at least a portion of it. Eat less processed food. Eat more whole foods. Eat fewer animals, eat more whole plants. And another thing I don't think we touched on is eat less. I think we briefly mentioned this, but eat less. America produces far more calories in food than we really need. And Americans are eating more calories than they need. That's why we have a problem with overweight and obesity. So every time you eat more than you need, you're actually wasting food. You're wasting food that could be used in another way, or to
Mm-hmm.
be exported, or used for people that actually need it. By overeating, we're actually doing an unsustainable effort, because we're actually consuming food that we don't need. So that's a big thing too, because Americans do consume more calories than they need. um, and then the food waste thing, we touched on this a little bit. 40% of our food that is grown, we don't even consume. It's being lost all along the food chain, but the most of it is being lost at the consumer level. So that means every time we go to the store and we forget that we had a head of lettuce in the back that was decaying and we bought a new one, every time we don't take our leftovers home, or we leave things at a restaurant, or we dish up more than we can eat and it's being thrown away, all of these things are contributing to, food waste. So really thinking a lot, reducing the portion sizes so that we're not, throwing food away, ordering less food when we go out to eat, packing up leftovers, doing a little inventory of the refrigerator before you go shopping, and using up the perishable things first so that things don't go to waste in the refrigerator. These are all things that are really important, because every time farmers are spending all of these resources to grow food, and 40% of it is just going into the trash one way or another. It's just an
40%.
enormous burden. Yes,
40%.
enormous. Yes. And
How
that, just
much
think if we could cut that part.
how much of the
Yeah.
40% happens on the consumer level?
The lion's share is happening at the consumer level. Very, I mean,
Yeah.
it happens all along the chain. You know, even the farmer, you know, may unfortunately, we have this expectation in America that we don't want to buy produce unless it's absolutely uniformly perfect. And that's why, you know, if you go to the supermarket, every apple is the same size, and God forbid that there's a little blemish on it because nobody will buy that apple. If you go to the farmer's market, every apple looks different, and there's scabs on it, and because that's what happens in nature. When you grow a garden, you're going to see that you know, every leaf of kale is not perfect. It may have one little bug bite in it, but it's still okay to eat. You know, again, we're so removed from our food that we don't
Mhm.
realize that. So there is some waste even at the farm level because farmers have to have perfect food now. But you know, so there is some waste there, and then along the way in processing, there's some waste. But the lion's share is happening right at the retail level. Supermarkets have huge issues because you know they have expiration dates, and you know produce that doesn't look, you know, looks a little bit stale won't get sold. And then at the home level, restaurants, huge amount of food waste, and at the home level where we're buying foods that aren't always consumed.
I saw a documentary a few years ago on Netflix about people who live out of garbage containers in the back of grocery stores, and I mean these people aren't homeless, but they know that so much food, good food, completely good food, gets thrown out by grocery stores, and there are people who they're even chefs who will go basically dumpster diving at the end of the day, and the food's still in packages. It's not like it's touching garbage. Like at first, I was totally. I thought it was the most disgusting they ever heard of, and then they show you the film. They're like, look, it's still in the package. Like it never touched anything bad. They just put it here in the dumpster, and you see that there are dumpster fulls literally every day. Every grocery store in America throws out dumpster fulls full of perfectly good food. And that food could be given, instead of throwing it out, could be given to um to people who in need. And but we don't have the infrastructure, and
Exactly.
there's no money to be made by creating the staff and creating the extra man hours to get that food to the homeless, for example, or to the needy. And so it really takes having to get enough passionate people involved to do it in a way that is still within the parameters of food safety. Um, and so it's interesting. I just saw this on Facebook, a video about how in Las Vegas, because there's so much waste in Vegas, for example, with all the conventions, that what they do is it was, I think it was the MGM, it was one hotel that freezes. They created a flash freezer in their catering kitchen, and so all the food that they make that doesn't ever go out, so let's say they make, 10 chafing dishes full of pasta, for example, and then that convention only uses 5 of them, right? So they take all of the hot food that was never served, and they immediately flash freeze it, and then they deliver it at the end of the day to the soup kitchens in Las Vegas.
Hmm.
And if every single hotel that had this sort of level of catering, if they implemented this, I mean, we could feed so many people, and so much food would not go to waste. But I like what you said about looking in our fridge and doing a little inventory. Just this morning, right before I got on Skype with you, I opened up the fridge and I said to my husband, okay, I did a little mental inventory and I said, we don't need to eat out for the next few days. Cause it's so much fun to, I mean, and there are restaurants here that are organic and vegan and, still totally healthy, but it's a splurge. And I looked in the fridge and I said, okay, we don't need to eat out for the next few days. We've got enough food to eat. We got to eat it up. Right. And I do that ever so often. I just look at the fridge and I go, okay, this is at least 3 days worth of food. So we don't need to go grocery shopping again, and we don't need to go out, eat out. And I have to remind ourselves because it's so easy to forget what's in the fridge and then go to the grocery store. There's even apps. There's even smart fridges you can buy where you put the inventory of what's in your fridge on the tablet that's on the front door of your fridge, and then the fridge tells you what's in the fridge, so you don't even open the door to know what's in your fridge. And that app talks to your smartphone so you can see what's in your fridge, and it'll help you create recipes. So it's definitely a problem that we're facing, that they've created a smart fridge and and an app to go with it. But we could also just open the door and, and do a little inventory of ourselves and remind ourselves we don't need to go grocery shopping for the next few days. Let's get creative and eat up everything that's in the fridge. Now, you mentioned that we could, instead of wasting the food and throwing it in the garbage, we could compost. Does composting somehow not put the nitrogen into the environment?
So composting is really good for your soil because it puts nitrogen into the soil. There is some concern of that the actual composting process, where food is composing, that it releases methane. But I think the feeling is right now the overall benefits are so good from composting that we should all be doing
Got it.
that, because it's if it goes to the landfill, it's doing that anyway. But this is, nature used to compost. That's how all the nutrition got into the soil, is organic material, dropped on the soil, whether it was animals dying or leaves falling, and that nourished the soil. So this is part of our ecosphere. So by composting, all of the things that would normally go in your trash that are organic materials, um, we can add those as nutrients back. So it's really the perfect thing. Although I like to tell people, your first choice is to actually use that food. I mean, composting is your last resort. Um, Try to eat everything, and or freeze it, find a way to use that food. But if it's going to be lost, then at least compost it. And one
Mm-hmm.
other thing that I didn't mention is that a lot of times we're only eating a portion of our plant foods that we could eat. For example, you can eat beet greens. You don't have to only eat the tuber. So a lot of times we throw away valuable things. And in many cultures, they eat the greens of everything. And greens are so nutritious. So radish greens, broccoli greens. In Asia, they eat yam greens. So many of these, the green part of the plant. And once you start gardening, you're going to have all of that. We could be eating all of that. I don't. I peel very few vegetables when I'm cooking. Carrots, I just scrub them. We don't need to be peeling away all the nutrients in a lot of our vegetables, or
Mm-hmm.
and fruits as well. So using more of the plant can reduce food waste too.
I love beet greens. They're one of my favorite things. And what I do is I buy the whole beet, including the greens. I cut off the greens and I put them aside. And then I chop up a beet into, smaller pieces and I saute it. And that takes the longest to cook. So I saute that for like, 5 minutes or more. And then I cut up the other vegetables I'm going to put in there, like, for example, cabbage, because beets are so sweet. It's like a succulent candy that it'll enhance whatever stir fry you make. So then I cut up some cabbage and I put that in there, and then I'll throw in a handful of cashews. And at the very, very end, I've cut up the beet greens, and even I'll turn off the stove and throw the beet greens in without even cooking them, because just the heat alone from having sauteed everything wilts them, and they're so delicious. But yeah, you don't want to cook the beet and the beet greens at the same time because that'll overcook the beet greens. But yeah, one of my favorite foods to put in is making sure that I have the beet greens. I once had a friend over and she threw out my beet greens. I got so upset because that's like the best part. That's interesting
Right. I
about
know the
radishes.
greens. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It,
Radish
I've
greens, a
never
lot of
heard
the
of that.
greens, even
Yeah.
carrot greens. Yeah, and in many cultures, they're eating all the greens that we just throw away. And we know that green leafy vegetables, I recommend trying to get a green leafy vegetable in your diet every day. They're so rich in nutrients. And as you said, the green leafy vegetables, I think, are a really good when they're just barely wilted, just a couple of minutes,
Mm-hmm.
where they still have a bright greenness. But finding ways to use the whole plant. And when you have a garden, you're going to see how things grow. Like I have celery in my garden pretty much all the time. And celery is all about the leaves when you have it in your garden. But when we get in the store, they usually chop off the leaves or just leave a little bit. But it's a very leafy vegetable, and I think celery greens are amazing. So
Mm.
another reason to grow your own vegetables, because you get to enjoy some things that you might not ever taste. And one of the green leafy vegetables are some of the easiest to grow. If you're just starting a vegetable garden, Things like kale are very easy to grow. Spinach, Swiss chard. I have bok choy growing right now. Mustard greens, collard greens. And the great thing about these is you just kind of give it a haircut and they just keep coming back. So it's the easiest plant. Just one plant, you can just go and give it a haircut, and more leaves come up the next day. So that's like a great thing to get going in your garden.
Oh man, that sounds so delicious. Awesome. I have a question from a listener. Um her name's Naomi and this is in our Facebook group Learn True Health. So you can go to anyone can go to Facebook and search Learn True Health and find our group of listeners. And Naomi says that she's looking for some inspiration to help feed her kids. So she has a kid that loves, and basically they do not have any junk food in their house, but her kid will eat anything that's snack food. So like sweet potato fries, chips, salsa. And he's basically loves junk food, but he doesn't have access to junk food. And so she's trying to get creative. Do you have any suggestions, or maybe can you point us in the right direction to resources for moms who want to get more healthy food into their kids, and all the kids want to do is eat junk food?
So, one of the things that I find really helpful for kids is they love interaction. They like to be actively engaged in their food. So I found that, for example, they'll eat more vegetables if they have something to dip it in. So I think almost every kid I've ever met loves hummus. It's just a mainstream food now, or even creating some other dips. Like I have a healthy ranch dip that's made with cashews and with herbs. So having the fresh veggies where they can actually have an activity. One thing that I've done in schools when I volunteer in schools is I like to take cross sectional slices of apples, which almost look like a face. If you slice an apple kind of like along the trajectory of the core, so that you kind of have this nice cross sectional slice. And I've let kids decorate the apple slice with peanut butter and raisins. They make a happy face, and then it's kind of like a craft and then a healthy snack, because I really do think kids like to be involved with their food.
Mm.
Another thing about gardening, and research shows that kids that grow vegetables will actually eat them. So even if you just have a little pot with a green bean or something growing, just to show kids how vegetables grow and how they come from the soil, and watch the little stems peek up from the soil as they come rising up, can get kids excited about how vegetables grow. Taking them to the farmers market, because a lot of farmers markets will let kids try the samples, and that's a fun way that they might actually try something if it's a sample from the farmer. So really getting them exposed to things. And another thing that I have found very helpful, and this is backed up by research, is that kids may say, "Oh, I don't want to try it. It's gross," or they're resistant, especially when it comes to vegetables. But research shows with consistent exposure, they will learn to accept it over time. So even if you're having dinner or lunch or snacks, and you have some things out like broccoli flowers or cauliflower florets or snow peas, and they don't want to try it, just having it in front of their eyesight for repeated occasions can make them eventually want to try that. So this whole idea that they become more familiar with things because they're around, they're not odd anymore, they're like a normal part of a diet, can help kids eventually want to try certain things.
I think same goes for adults too. I love I love the that concept of but I mean, let's say right now, let's just start this today. All listeners, go grocery shopping. The next time you go grocery shopping, buy a vegetable you've never eaten before, and then Google how to cook with it. Like just every week, we took on this experiment a few years ago. My husband and I would choose a different something we've never had before, either a fruit or a vegetable we've never had before. And you know what we tried last week was soursop, a type of fruit. And my friend from Barbados was like, "Oh, you got some soursop in your fridge. Can I have some?" And I'm like, I bought it and I didn't know how to like eat it. They said you had to peel it, and they said it tasted sort of, this is a fruit that looks like an alien egg. Really does look like an alien. Just hatched this thing, and it looks you have to peel this green skin away, and this white sticky flesh is underneath with these giant black seeds, a few of them. And what the flesh tastes like is a mixture between strawberries, banana, and pineapple. That's the best way I can describe sour sock,
Mm.
and it was delicious. And of course, my friend from Barbados wanted to like eat all of it, and I was like, okay, well let's share it. And it was delicious. He goes, this is like the best fruit ever, and I would have never tried that, had I not wanted to get out of my comfort zone and try new things. And so, when you see that weird vegetable or that weird fruit that looks like an alien to you because you've never had it or you didn't grow up with it, just try it. Every week, try a new one, and if you love it, then incorporate that into your life like all the time. And that way, especially with kids, get the kids to pick out something new. Like go like let them be part of the experience, either growing it like you suggested, which I think is brilliant. My friend Bernetti, her kid would never eat vegetables. She had to like figure out how to hide them, like sneak them into his food. And then when they started a garden, they got two little, they have a very small front yard. They started two little like kiddie pools, and they grew kale, and he picked out a few seeds. He grew a few of his own plants. And he was in, I think he was about 6 or 7 at the time. Like, he was old enough to understand basically understand it. And then, he took care of the garden every day, watered it, weeded it, and sure enough, he ate everything they grew. And now he eats fruit and vegetables all the time. He has no problem with it, but he really did have a problem with them before. And it wasn't until he started growing it. But take your kids and go to the grocery store and get them to pick out the experimental fruit or vegetable, right? And so that everyone gets to have fun experimenting. Growing up, a really good friend of mine's mom, her name's Marcia, she had a rule in her house. Everyone has to try her food, but if you don't like it, you can spit it out. And so she said, this is, if you want to be in my house, you have to try everything I cook. And if you don't like it, there's the garbage can. And she wouldn't be insulted, but she wanted to make sure everyone at least experimented. And that way, and you know what? No one ever spat out her food, and everyone tried it and everyone liked it. So I like that rule too. Like, it's okay if you spit it out, but you got to try it first.
Yeah, I like that too. I kind of had a similar rule when my kids were growing up. Is that, well, they always had to have one fruit or vegetable on their plate, and a lot of times they would pick their favorites. But I would have like a family style meal, and that was always exposed to them. And if they, I would encourage them to try it, even if they didn't like it. Just put one little tiny little half a teaspoon on your plate. But that exposure, now they both love fruits and vegetables. I mean, it wasn't always easy street, but I think sometimes we don't need to force them, like make so much
Mm.
out of it. I've seen that backfire. But just that exposure, and to let them know that's normal and delicious and healthy, and it's not some foreign thing they've never seen before.
Mhm.
So I really like what you're saying about that as well.
Very cool. Now, just to go back to clarify, so because I had said nitrogen, but what I meant to say was methane. So when something is decomposing, like our compost, it produces some amount of methane, regardless of whether we send it to the dump or where we have it in our backyard as a compost pile. But the reason why we want to avoid putting it in the dump, and we'd like to put it in our garden, for example, is that it's having a beneficial effect in that we're now growing, and you could use it for your lawn, you could use it for your bushes, your trees. It doesn't just have to be a vegetable garden. But that the nutrients in that compost, including the nitrogen, will feed the wonderful plants. And so that then has a greater positive impact both on our health and our environment, where if we just throw it in the we're filling the landfills with all, like 40% of our food that is grown is now thrown in the landfill, and that is ridiculous and unsustainable. And then it's going to waste. It's not that rich compost could be used for soil, and it's not. So that's why you're saying really we need to become more conscious of the food waste.
Exactly, you said that perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, the when the composting is really Mother Nature's way to nourish the soil. It was never it was never the preferred method to use isolated nitrogen and isolated phosphorus, and the way we do modern farming now. And it not only provides nutrients, but it provides all the bacteria that the soil needs. It's just perfect for soil, because it's alive. So it's nourishing And it's also providing what we call soil organic material, which is kind of the actual bulk, this wonderful bulk. When you're adding just a shot of nitrogen, you're not adding any bulk to the soil, right? So
Mm.
this organic material is nourishing the volume of the soil too. So it has so many benefits. And as you say, it's not just for vegetable gardening. I mean, you could use composting all over your property and you wouldn't have to use fertilizers, then it could take that place, which is much better for, it's not just pesticides that are damaging the environment, it's fertilizers as well. And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people don't realize that.
Mm-hmm. Your education, the sustainable food systems, I think a lot of listeners, I know I do have a lot of listeners that are sort of looking for that second career. Maybe they're in school and they're looking for their first career. When you graduate with a master's in sustainable food systems, what kind of work can you do? I know you are going to keep doing the wonderful work you do as a registered dietitian and helping, you're a food activist and helping people wake up and make better choices for themselves and the planet. But what could someone do with that degree?
Yeah, well, a lot of my colleagues that are in the program right now are doing amazing things. Like a lot of them are working, for example, at a farmer's market. Maybe they're the manager of their local farmer's market. Some of them are farmers. A lot of them are small organic farmers, and they want to learn more. There's this huge movement in America of what's called the beginner farmers movement, where young people want to become farmers, and which is what
Mm,
we need because our farming population is getting older, and so we need a young generation coming in to replace the retiring farmers. I have a lot of school garden. So for a lot of colleges have their own school garden, so they maybe are managing their school garden, or we're seeing more school gardens in elementary schools. So we're seeing that, and we're seeing a lot of NGOs that are in my program. People working in NGO for promoting sustainability, and they want that background. We have somebody who's working for the National Organic Standards Program in my master's program. So we have a lot of people, in organizations, all the way down to people who are actually planting, um, the healthy vegetables that we're eating. So it's a really exciting field, and I think sustainability is really, if you're really interested in exploring a career, there are so many opportunities, and I mean, what a way to feel good about what you do every day.
absolutely. Very exciting. Awesome. Well, Sharon, it's been so wonderful having you on the show again. I feel every time we talk, I feel like we're just scratching the surface when it comes to all like how much information you have to share and all this. It's I think it's really exciting learning about something we take for granted. We really I think in America, I think in many cultures now, unfortunately in modern day society, we take our food for granted. We take now we're starting not to take our health for granted because a lot of people have lost their health and that's why they're listening. But I think we really take our food, like we take the fact that there's gasoline at the gas pumps for granted, right? Until it's not there. Where I think we really take our food for granted, especially clean and healthy food. And I love the idea of pulling back the curtain and seeing from farm to table what it takes and what we need to do to change the current system to make it healthier. I believe in capitalism, which is, what we have right now, because even though right now it's incredibly detrimental to our health and our ecosystem, it'll capitalism will shift when we vote with our fork. Because capitalism wants to make money and it'll fight at first because it'll fight to keep itself the way it's going right now. But if all of us stop investing in the way it does it now, then companies will bend and to try to catch our money, to try to just like fishing, right? They will change the bait. They will change their tactics. And so if we say no, we're not going to buy, that kind of food, now we're buying this kind of food. And now we're supporting this kind of agriculture. The capitalism will make it so that the people, like you said, the young farmers are coming in that are they want to do organic because they want to satisfy their customers. They also want to make a positive impact in the world. So I think that's why it's so important that each and every time we spend any dollar, that we spend it towards supporting the systems we believe in, because enough of us do it, and that will bend the system, and that will shift the system, because that's how capitalism works. So it's ultimately up to the consumers to support the system, because right now we're supporting the wrong system. I think that we're seeing that already in our health of our environment and our the health of our population. And I love that you were inspired after so many years of being a registered dietitian. You were inspired to look at this, that you saw that health was more than what was on the plate, and that was actually what it took to get on the plate that really is going to make the difference. So that's exciting, and I really look forward to continuing to follow you and your work on your website, and continuing to see how this evolves, and how you help to teach us the day-to-day steps we can take to make it a better world, and also to improve our health at the same time. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you, Ashley, and thank you for all the wonderful work you're doing and helping people live better lives as well. It's such a pleasure to be with you.
I want to tell you about something I really believe in, which is nutrition. On my show, I get to talk to specialists throughout the entire health universe: chiropractors, herbalists, naturopaths, mental and emotional health coaches, and licensed healthcare providers. Amazing pieces to the puzzle we call health. All of these, of course, are supposing that you're actually eating. We, we eat to get all the raw building blocks our body requires. And that's where the problem starts. There's no more food in our food, right? I think everyone knows about the deficiencies in our soil that our food is grown in. Those deficiencies are passed down to us unless we can supplement. Which brings me to takeyoursupplements.com. These people work with my go-to doctor, my go-to naturopath, for all my supplements. I've used them for 7 years. My family and I love them. They work. And if you'd love to address your nutrient deficiencies and figure out what supplements are right for you, then you definitely want to go to takeyoursupplements.com. You put in your information, and within 24 hours, one of their health coaches contact you, and for free will talk with you and figure out exactly what supplements are best for you, the highest quality for the lowest price that fit into your budget and address your nutrient needs. They're amazing coaches. I've known them for years. I love them. They're wonderful people. They have a huge heart, and they really want to help you to dial in your supplements and your diet and your lifestyle to achieve your health goals. So go to takeyoursupplements.com and put in your information now. That's takeyoursupplements.com. You will be very happy you did. Hello, True Health Seeker. I have a very exciting announcement. I have spent over a year, I've spent about 14 months collecting all of my information that I use with my clients for ending anxiety, and I created an online program. I'm very excited about it. We just launched it. And for you, for free, I have a webinar where I teach you 2 powerful mind tricks for removing anxiety, ending worry, and controlling fear so it stops controlling you and your life. In my free webinar, you will learn what causes anxiety and how to stop it, the science behind the mind-body connection, overcoming fear of public speaking, getting unstuck, ending that fear of things not working out, ending procrastination and overwhelm, and feeling excited, grounded, and calm instead of fear and worry. I have so much to teach you in my free webinar, and I'm really excited for you to come check it out. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar. That's freeyouranxiety.com/webinar, or look in the show notes of today's podcast and you'll see the link there, so you can jump into the webinar and learn all these wonderful, powerful tools that will end your anxiety and create excitement and happiness instead. Go to freeyouranxiety.com/webinar and sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live webinar.